Hello and welcome to this episode of Nothing Ventured with me, Arish Shah. Today in the studio with me, I have Amrit Sami. Amrit is an investor at Mercia Ventures, where he identifies new investment opportunities and supports portfolio companies. He also co-hosts the podcast, What's the Problem?, where he dives into the challenges entrepreneurs face. His experience spans roles at Simvan Capital and as a scout for Ada Ventures, along with early positions in life sciences and consumer healthcare. Amrit's personal investments as a small check angel include businesses like Kaizen AI and Affinity Bank, further enhancing his active engagement in the venture space. In today's episode, we talk about how venture has an access asymmetry problem.
Venture has a huge access asymmetry problem. That's how I think investors get rich. And for the majority, unfortunately, that's not how it works.
How the best founders are the ones you can trust your kids with.
Could I trust you with my kid?
And how venture is about people from pre-seed to B and beyond.
Particularly at pre-seed and seed, it's just about people. Well, I think all the way to Series B, it's still about people.
Why intelligence is not a predictor of success, and how if you can't attract Gen Z talent, you won't be able to build a business.
When I speak to Gen Zs, and they're just kind of like, I want work-life balance. I want to spend time with my friends.
Why investment theses need to go in the bin, and much more.
I think investment theses are toilet paper.
Let's get straight into it. Hi guys, whilst I've got you for a second, I thought I'd reintroduce myself. My name's Arish. I am the host of Nothing Ventured, the podcast where I talk to the people behind the stories that make the venture ecosystem go round. I'm also the founder of Emerge One, a consultancy that provides fractional CFO support to venture-backed tech startups from seed to Series B and beyond. If you enjoy the podcast, we'd really appreciate it if you can like, rate, and comment wherever it is that you listen. And if you want to talk to me about anything you've heard on the podcast, or indeed refer a guest, do reach out to me on LinkedIn or on X. I'm always up for a bit of a chat. Right, let's get straight back into it. Amrit, really great to have you in the studio with me today. Thank you so much for joining.
My pleasure, as always. Thanks, Arish, for having me on.
Yeah, no worries at all. Look, many view angel investing as a pretty low risk way to engage with startups. What do you think people misunderstand about the real risks involved with microcheck investing, especially regarding access to quality deal flow versus making quick decisions? I mean, this is something that you and I have talked about, I think, quite a lot.
Yeah, I mean, the number of stuff I see on like Instagram that people post about, how'd you invest in Facebook when it was just, I know, a guy in Harvard, you'd be like a billionaire by now.
Sure.
But really, venture has a huge access asymmetry problem. That's how I think investors get rich. And for the majority, unfortunately, that's not how it works. And so really, it's all about access. And particularly with my job, I'm very privileged to have that access because I speak to founders through my role at Mercia Ventures. I live and breathe it. I don't want to say I work 996 because I definitely don't and don't adhere to that, but I get why you need to do that.
Yeah.
But because of that, I meet so many founders. I meet so many more founders. I can find great angel investments as a result of that. And it's really hard for me when I was trying to break into venture just to meet startups because I just didn't have enough time. I was working outside my 9 to 5 job and during my breaks and the days that I were off sick, which my manager didn't know. But because of that, it becomes really difficult to find it. Like, I think people assume that we go on Crowdcube or Seeders and like constantly search those companies to find, but it's really not the case. It's generally people who used to work at previous startups or through kind of networks, accelerators, other investors. And it is a full-time job. I mean, most jobs is like VC is like 50-60% time like sourcing deals.
Yeah, sure.
And so as a result of like a layman and angel investor, it becomes really, really difficult from a time constraint perspective. I think the second bit is really one of the other risks with it is if you're typically doing EIS, VCT, people kind of say, well, you get 50% tax relief, get EIS tax relief. If a company fails before that 3-year period, you don't actually get it all back. And so it is still really risky in that inherent basis. And then I think kind of a third bit really from venture is, you have to build a portfolio with it. It's not like you can do 3 angel investments and hope you get 100x within it.
That's where I'm sitting at the moment. But
yeah. Well, again, if you're in certain spaces, but like most angel investors keep on like telling me and that my mentors in the space keep on saying you've got to build a portfolio of 40 or 100 over a period of time. And it's a lot of them say it's the worst way for you to make money. Like it's a hobbyist thing. It's like collecting cars or stamps or something like that. Like you may make an asymmetric return on one, but don't bet your investments or life thesis on it as a result for it. And then I probably think maybe the last bit actually is to become a micro angel investor, you've got to be able to offer something to founders. And so, my check usually with a lot of angel investments is £1,000, £2,000. One day I get that Monaco yacht and I can probably increase it to £3,000, but one can only hope. But the reason why a lot of founders are willing to accept that me putting £1,000 or £2,000 into their company is because I'd be like, hey, I can introduce you to a lot of funds in the seed round or introduce you to customers, basically kind of using the skills I have as my day job into it. And so that becomes really quite kind of another barrier for, layman's to invest into angel investing.
Yeah. So I want to pick apart, not pick apart, but delve into kind of a few of these things, right? So firstly, on the micro check size, right? Like I think there, from a positive perspective, there has always been this sort of assumption, I guess, amongst, the general population that if you're going to be an angel, you need 25, 50, 100K checks to be able to do it. Which, to an extent is the case in that, obviously founders want to be dealing with bigger check investors because it's just easier,
100%.
right? But obviously with the evolution of syndicate platforms like Odin, obviously Vauban by Carter, and others, obviously, by the way, small check investor in Odin, so had to give them a shout out. Great platform. You can now syndicate and you can get into these rounds a bit easier, a bit more easy. But to your point, like if you are going directly into these businesses with with a 1K check, you want to be able to offer something more than that, which I think, to your point, can be quite difficult. And I think, it is easy to underestimate how hard it is to enter with a 1K check, right? Like, I mean, it doesn't matter how great you individually are. If you only have £1,000 to invest, like founders are more often than not going to be more, dismissive, if nothing else. So I think that's one thing. I think the second thing is on that deal sourcing, right? Which I find intriguing. It's one of these things that, I am not very good. Well, sorry, let me rephrase that. I have not been a hunter, right? Like in the sense that I don't go out looking for deals, but my inbox is flooded with lots of AI written kind of pitches, no decks. It's just really amusing. And as is my LinkedIn. So I get a lot of inbound, which I just ignore 99% of, right? And I kind of have this unwritten rule in my head now where if you just come out and straight pitch me, I'm just going to ignore you. Like if you approach me and like, look, want to have a chat about something and blah, 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 and then that evolves into you pitching me, great. If on the other hand, you're just like sending me a cold email, which I know you've sent to like 150,000 other people, I'm just going to ignore you. So yeah, I would love to get your thoughts on, so I guess on that dichotomy with the 1K check, but equally on the deal sourcing side, obviously, as you say, you're in venture, so you're seeing these deals, and presumably you could potentially invest personally in deals that Mercia passes, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, but like if you were talking to someone out there who is trying to get into this 1K check investing and aren't a VC, how would you approach it?
Yeah, I think it's like really interesting question. I mean, like first from the first point of like the 1K check bit, you've really got to add value before. And like even me as an investor, a lot of founders are like, I don't really know about that. And they'd be like, hold on, let me open my black book. And like, for instance, like ComplyStream, one of my angel investments, he was kind of a bit adamant about me putting in a grand check. It was like, could you push it up a bit more? And I was like, look, let me help you fundraise. And what I did, introduced him to Ascension kind of investing around. So that was 250K. I was like, okay, let me show my worth with that 1K. So sure. I do believe like it's an absolute privilege to be on a cap table. You're part of an exciting journey of life. And like, it is probably more admin hassle than it's worth, that £1,000. So you've got to really show that value for it in some sort of an instance. And you've got to solve the boring stuff for founders, to be quite honest, which is finance, a man like Arish, which is can share as a merge one, or it's fundraising, or it's kind of customers.
Yeah.
Those are sort of three things. And then it's like, okay, I get the value of being on the table because it's kind of like an advisor in some sort.
Sure.
And if you can't really offer those things, it becomes really quite challenging for it, for a lot of founders with that £1,000. And that's even if you're an investor, right, at that point in time. And then I think the second bit with it is, to your point on kind of like deal flow and like access, like I hate pitch decks. I hate when founders pitch to me, particularly at the pre-seed. And like, I usually, the first meetings I have with founders is like, I don't want to see your pitch deck. I want to get to know like you
Just have a conversation with me. Yeah.
as a human, like face to face,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
person to being, because that's really what it is. It's about building that relationship and me getting to understand you. And like, I get it again, this founder mode and go, look, my TAM is like 10 billion and it's, you know, that's where you should invest.
Can we just remove the TAM slide?
Oh
from
my
pitch
God,
decks?
I hate TAM sizes. I
Let's
hate
just get rid
market
of it.
sizes.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
just not needed. I don't know why we have it, but c'est la vie. And so, but really what I care more about is you as a founder and like the things, I kind of had the thing in my head. I don't have kids, but I'm like, could I trust you with my kid?
Interesting. Yeah.
And what I mean by that is like, look, if something goes wrong, are you going to tell me? It's, you know, are you willing to, you know, call me up? Are you willing to be honest about conversations? Because like, I'd want to know those things. And I'm not saying my money is my kid. That makes me seem like a evil capitalist right about now.
Why not?
Yeah. But it's just that honesty of like the person and character and that integrity piece. And that's the thing I really like look for in a lot of like startups. And you just don't get that in a pitch deck.
So this actually leads to an additional question here, right? You mentioned the information asymmetry and the whole kind of arbitrage that is venture, right? But that also actually flows down as an investor. So if you're a 1K check investor, you won't necessarily get the same information rights as a VC for sure, but or a larger check or whatever, right? And I've had this with a couple of the companies that I've invested in, where, you know, some I get the same monthly update that everyone does, and brilliant.
Yeah.
Or maybe they have a larger update for others, but I don't think they do. But others, I haven't heard from them in the last 6 months. And then every now and again, I might get an email, which frankly annoys me, but equally I don't have the power to go back and say, hey, you know, where's your update kind of thing, right? Like, how do you think about that? Because especially if you are, in inverted commas, if you are supporting them with some sort of advisory or whatever, in order to do that, you need the information. So how do you treat that? And do you see that as a problem?
It's a really good question. I think actually we're thinking about the problem in a slightly different way.
Yeah.
And it goes to that point, I think like Mandeep Singh, again, he gave a talk and he was like, venture is an awful way to make money. And I think the reason why I like angel invest is like the money I've put in, I've completely disregarded it.
Yeah, it's throwaway. It has to be
throwaway money. Yeah. And so my view and my role as an angel is, look, I don't need to know the information rights. I'm here to help and support you. Because for me, I guess in the long term, it's building that social capital. It's building that references. It's, you know, maybe one day these founders make a huge exit return and be an LP for a potential fund I want to raise.
Sure.
Or I build up a reputation, or I just learn about cool stuff, because that's why I do venture.
Yeah, sure.
Is learning a lot about that stuff. And so when it comes to information stuff, like actually a good example is I had a chat with a Research Angel portfolio, talking about the kind of raise and some introductions I could make for it, etc. And he was like, yeah, it's probably one thing I need to tell you. So like me and my co-founder split up and we didn't really tell anyone about that. And I think they told the investors, and it was like told me through his decision or why it was a wrong decision. And you could see his face that's like, you know, regretting, because there's this expectation when you raise money, like you want to put your best foot forward.
Yeah,
you want to,
you don't want to be seen to have failed.
Yeah.
In any way, even though actually that's acceptable. And if anything, as an investor, how you approach failure is more important than how you approach success, right?
And like the first question I was asking was like, how did you feel about it? What was the whole experience for it? And then I was kind of like, this is what I'm here for, is look, your board is probably going to put that pressure on you to, you know, perform, expect, stuff like that. So my role as an angel, my role is just to be here for you. Because I know how difficult it is for founders and how stressful it is that whole period. I've got a 1K check. Well, I don't think any angel investor should be throwing their weight and being demanding, you know, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? Maybe some angels do want to do that, but that's not how I want to play. And that's not my thesis and my approach for venture. Is just coming from a place of empathy.
Yeah.
And he was just like, I'm really glad we had this conversation. I'm going to call you up more often now and like just talk about these problems, because it's difficult speaking to an investor about it. Yeah.
I would absolutely agree. I think that kind of traditional worldview of an angel being someone, you know, puts in the 50K and then is like riding you really hard. You know, I don't think that, you know, certainly within tech venture, I don't see that as much. In fact, like even the kind of 300, 400, 500K check riders, and there are some of them that I know, are very much cheerleaders and support rather than telling you how to run your business, right? Which I think is the reality, because an angel can come with their perspective, what they think you need to do, but you are one of 10, 20, 100 in their portfolio, which, they just simply don't have the bandwidth or don't have the knowledge that you have as a founder to be able to do that. So I think that's super, and I think that is changing with the rise of these smaller checks, because, people are understanding that, you can have very, very different perspectives as an angel. Irrespective of your check size, you have something to offer. And the fact that you're writing the check in the first place shows that you have, within your world, that is a large amount of money, right? Like that is, and in mine for that matter as well, right? Like any angel investment that I make, I think about it very hard, because it's, it's money that I won't spend on going on holiday or doing something with my kids or whatever it is, right? And therefore, it is an emotional commitment as much as anything else. And I guess I'd round off this whole kind of topic with one maybe thought, not necessarily a question. You said that 1K check isn't necessarily going to lead to an outcome that is going to be life-changing. But let's also be really clear, they can, right?
Yeah.
So it is now wide knowledge that 2.5K put into Revolut's crowd round has minted a bunch of millionaires, right?
Yeah.
1.5 million is what that initial check was worth. And it's like the Jason Calacanis kind of, his initial investment in Uber and all of these sort of things, right? Like it can happen, it does happen, but you got to play the game in order for it to happen, right?
Yeah.
Like, so you can sit on the sidelines, or you can see whether you can put some of your capital to work and see whether that can happen. I guess the real problem is, as a 1K check investor, like to get to 100 investments, right? Like the whole point is you're capital poor, or cash poor, right? Or cash constrained, rather, is a better way of putting it. Like when I think about, okay, how do I get to £100,000 worth of angel investments? I'm like, oh man, that feels like a hard slog.
Yeah, I mean, look, as well, like as much as I think there's challenges with it. I mean, I'm 2-3 years in, and I think I've like 3x my portfolio.
Amazing.
So I'm doing something right, and I guess I'm learning for it as a result.
At least on paper.
At least on paper, but bragging rights matter a lot in VC. But look, and like there's so many asymmetric upsides from that point of view. And I think one other thing is, I think everyone in venture, maybe not everyone, but when you start investing, you suck. Just 100%. Like the first deals I remember doing, like, just sucked.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think one of the first deals I wrote went to zero in 2 months or something like ridiculous. But yeah.
But it's just name of the game. But like, as I've seen with everyone, like the more deals you do, the better you get, and get up to that learning curve. So to the point of like, yes, you may have to do 100 deals to kind of get that, but probably by like deal 50 or 60, you'll probably be getting some pretty big, outside outliers as a result of that. I do think it's still worthwhile doing it. It's just a kind of game of consistency. It's just that one asymmetric upside of where, you may get 100x, which underwrites your whole rest of your portfolio of being 0x. So, and I think as well, if you keep on thinking a long game of like, in my view, like founders' well-being, founders are going to talk to one another. And when I speak to like new angel investments, I'd be like, speak to my portfolio, what they think about you. And then they rave and they support you and they build that advocacy. And that's what gets you into those really competitive deals in the long run.
I think I absolutely treat angel investing as a learning, as an opportunity for learning. In fact, you talked about Crowdcube or Seeders. Like one of the things I did with my kids when they were, in their teens or earlier in their teens, was to go through Crowdcube and Seeders and look for like a couple of investments. Why do you think this is interesting? Why do you think, you'd put money, and putting 50 quid into those businesses or whatever, right? Like, I mean, it's just a good way of understanding risk reward, financial discipline,
100%.
like, what is the information that you should be looking for, all of those sort of things. I don't think they're that interested anymore, sadly, but I had high hopes.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah. My 13-year-old, at the time 13-year-old, is not going to be the VC that I thought she was. C'est la vie, as you say. All right, let's move on. Right, you and I have talked about this, and you've mentioned that intelligence doesn't necessarily correlate with better investment returns. What do you believe is often overlooked about the role of luck in decision making, particularly when you're assessing which founders to back?
Yeah, okay. Well, let me split my answers in two on like why I don't believe kind of intelligence is correlated with investment returns, and go on my soapbox about IQ. And then I'll probably talk about kind of what's probably is correlated with returns and kind of in detail. And so when you think about intelligence, people think about IQ as an area, and people, I'm not quite sure. Well, I guess it's from like 70s of corporate America of thinking, what's the best leaders? Well, we get a standardized test of IQ, and the people with the highest IQ were the best leaders, and therefore the smartest people. And then I'm not quite sure how it got somewhat correlated that it was an inherent quotient that you were just born with high IQ or not. But like more and more evidence comes out with actually like IQ is not related to success and not related to anything more successful than that.
Yeah, some of the smartest people I know are not, they're successful within the realms of what they do,
right?
But they're not the hyper successful by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, and like, so there was an interesting, I think, report from like, I think Stanford or Harvard, which showed it, and really a high IQ just really gives you a probability that you're not dumb, or you reduce the probability of not being dumb. But it doesn't really go anything above or beyond that. So we've not actually got a test that measures high intelligence. We've got a test that measures
lack of dumbness.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then yet we've got people kind of go, I've got an IQ of 172, you should give me money. And it's not really quite the case, particularly in venture, which is particularly at pre-seed and seed, it's just about people. Well, I think all the way to Series B, it's still about people. And it's that emotional intelligence piece, and but being able to read the room and really understanding that point of view. But I think with both those points, actually what you've been proven that IQ you can improve upon. You can improve upon the test and improve your IQ intelligence. And similarly with emotional intelligence, it's a skill you can keep on learning. And so probably the reason why I kind of hate it is I'm a firm believer like anyone can achieve anything to a really ridiculous standard. Like next year, I believe I could probably go on the MBA. Maybe a bit far-fetched because I don't live in America, but like if you have the right skills, if you have the right, passion for it, and you have the right training program, you can achieve anything in that respect. And I'm a firm believer of that because I believe meritocracy is super important. And I think there are other, I guess, invisible hands at play that make it difficult, which we can delve into later. But to that point is like, we obsess over this IQ metric that is actually just really meaningless on how we look at broader life and therefore investment.
I'm gonna chip in for a second because I feel like I have to defend myself as a member of the high IQ club.
Bring out the Mensa card.
Yeah, I think I subscribed and then ditched it within like about three months or something. No, but joking aside, I absolutely fully agree with you because I don't think IQ is correlated with success. In fact, if anything, you look at a lot of the people within the kind of high IQ bandwidths and they're very socially awkward potentially. They have some real interests, right?
Yeah.
But that interest might be in the breeding and mating habits of, the tawny owl in North, Lincolnshire or something, right? Like who knows? But often they aren't obsessed about money, right? And success it's certainly in the frame that we're talking about, which is venture and business, is often correlated with money. In fact, you look at the most successful entrepreneurs, they probably wouldn't have done well in those IQ tests. You think about someone like Richard Branson. Why? Because actually they probably fall more on the spectrum, ADHD rather than necessarily just high IQ. And actually, my very mini thesis, and I don't think this is controversial by any stretch of the imagination. I think actually ADHD, probably less to an extent autism, but ADHD certainly is actually quite a good marker of potential success, because the ability to assimilate and make connections and think strategically, which is an inherent trait of people with ADHD, are the inherent traits of people that are successful in business. And again, not saying this because I think I have ADHD either, but and I definitely would not say I'm successful at this point. But yeah, look, I mean, I think I'd agree. And the whole kind of premise of standardized testing and all that sort of stuff. Again, what's been proven and certainly in those sort of tests in a work environment is that it can very much depend on the day that you take the test.
100%.
And the emotion that you're feeling on the day that you, like if you'd got some bad news that had nothing to do with work, you may perform poorly on that test when you come to take it. Whereas, okay, if you just found out that, you're having your first kid, for example, maybe you're euphoric and actually perform better than you would otherwise, right?
100%. There's actually a interesting like portfolio story at like Mercia, which I don't know if I can really tell, but I'll ask our team afterwards in compliance. But company was a consumer business doing sort of 3 million ARR. We got in a new CEO who, the previous CEO kind of probably hit his kind of glass ceiling and limit and needed to bring someone on. But on this new CEO, we did a like standardized test. She performed like really badly on it apparently. That business is now doing like 50 million a year.
This is the new CEO.
The new CEO, which had done badly on these tests.
So hold on, did badly on the test, but then you still hired.
Yeah, but I think this is the interesting point is like the referencing that this is one data point I think we looked at amongst the other things.
Yeah.
But I think also goes to that point of like, had we over-indexed on this one trait, we probably wouldn't have hired her, and that business probably wouldn't be at 50 million ARR where it's at today.
Yeah,
which is just like phenomenal. So I think that kind of discusses a point on like why I think kind of intelligence isn't it? But there's this whole romanticized view or this mythology of like entrepreneurship being meritocratic, and it feeds really nicely into it. I think kind of what are kind of good skills that I like to see in founders is people who just like love to learn and people who can learn really, really quickly, and that ability to learn like new areas, which I think is a good trait of ADHD people, if I remember correctly.
Only if they're interested.
Only if they're interested.
Like you have to. So, and again, without this turning into a kind of a podcast, but I mean, like, and I'm by no means an expert, but what I've read and what I've understood is, if you have ADHD and you come across a topic that you're super interested in, you will go down that rabbit hole like really deep. And I've done that certainly in my life many, many, many times. But it has to pull you in. You can learn other stuff easily, but if it doesn't interest you, you kind of get bored really quickly. And it's basically about dopamine and reward systems and how your brain works. But yeah, I mean, like ultimately, and this is why, for example, in the world, in the world that I live in the work that I do, one of the reasons that I have been relatively successful at what I do is because I'm a massive generalist. I have the ability to learn stuff really quickly, but I can probably go like an inch or two deep, but I can go a mile wide. Which again is a very typical venture trait as well, I guess. Right? Like a lot of investors have the ability to assimilate and aggregate information across a broad range of topics, and take that approach. Because at the end of the day, the founders, the guys and the girls that are building these businesses, they're the sector experts, they're the domain experts. So to an extent, I've always said, right, one of the things that I'm actually fairly comfortable saying is that I think experts are often the wrong people to spot the problems, right? Because their expertise is built on prior experience and knowledge, etc., and therefore, they default to a state of, well, I already know this, and therefore can't be challenged. So I actually, for example, like EdTech, which I was heavily involved in, maybe a decade ago, I think the worst people to build EdTech businesses are teachers, because they approach it from the same perspective as the system that was already out, was unfit for purpose, because it's 150 years old, right? Whereas the right people, in fact, I will be interviewing Anand Saul, who's the founder of CB Insights,
awesome.
Who's now building a new form of school. And his email to me was like, look, I'm not sure, I'm now just chair of CB, but if you're interested in talking about education and how how we need to flip the script on the model that has persisted for centuries now, then would love to do the podcast. I'm like, Jesus, I mean, you could not talk about anything more interesting to me, because I just 100%. Think it is such a broken system. But anyway, but yes, the point is, like ultimately anyone can learn anything, and there are non-domain experts who have become domain experts through trying to build a solution for a problem that they saw differently, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean that they needed to be high IQ, intelligent,
Yeah.
or even good performers at school. And like, I'm one of these people, for example, who did really well at school, hit my teens, got really bored, did well because I'm good enough to just coast my way through, got decent grades, went to a
Yeah.
good university, half-assed that, got an okay outcome, and then just went on with life and did everything I did, irrespective of my learning outcomes. Whereas, lots of people who come out with first class degrees, etc., end up being automatons in a law firm or an accountancy firm or in a consultancy firm or in a bank or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And actually, what I've tended to find is the really great entrepreneurs are the ones that, treat formal education as with skepticism, but informal education, they are all in.
I mean, there's a couple of really interesting points on that. Is like, so I went to a kind of a state school where I had to kind of teach myself. Because they're just like, I get it. Like teachers, they're more worried about so many kids, disruptive kids. There's so many other issues going on in the classroom.
They want everyone at the same level.
Yeah. And so I kind of had to like teach myself. I remember like teachers like catching me leaving and like, you should be in school. And I was like, I'm just going to go home and learn myself, and did it anyway. But like, I think that in and of itself becomes a really valuable skill. And I think when you're set up for a certain classroom environment, you learn in that teaching environment. It really struggles when you're not able to learn on yourself. I think to that point as well, I just love being a journalist. Like, it's just so fascinating about learning about life.
So much more fun, yeah.
And I agree with you. There's actually an interesting book, I think, from like Malcolm Gladwell, which actually talks about this point, is like great forecasters aren't the sector expertise, who people who go really deep. They're the generalist or people who understand the consensus and point of view. And so you kind
That's
of...
not super forecaster, no, because he didn't write that.
I do remember it.
I know which book you're talking about, but I can't remember the name. Yeah, sure.
And I also think there's like a certain degree where you can abstract problems to a level, but I think most VCs realize is, and this is where founders I think get upset, is like, okay, you're going to tell me the problem that I'm going to fix. Most VCs, even with founders, were like, bro, like I was a founder like 6 years ago. Things have changed a lot. Like I don't quite know. I can understand your problems and feel your pains and emotions because I was there. But don't ask me about your go-to-market strategy. I can give you a good view on what I think works and point you in the direction of experts.
But if it was the same thing you were doing 6 years ago, then it's the wrong thing to be doing today, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's probably one of the challenging kind of bits founders don't realize with a lot of it. But we're super networkers. We have the people to connect with, and we can empathize. Well, I think great VCs are the empathizers, and the ones who are, if you're a scientist, willing to be in a lab with you and roll up and be there. Yeah, so I can't remember where we were going.
Yeah,
next.
no. So no, for sure. We took a massive tangent.
Sorry.
No, my fault. And well, actually, not even my fault. I was very interested. Yeah, so luck in decision making and outcomes.
And this is the thing. I think what grinds my gears about in the world of venture is, I think a lot of it is marketing. To be really quite honest, and I get it because like you need to show you're smart because it gives a level of confidence to LPs that they'll invest in you as a result. But a lot of it is marketing. And when you speak to fund, partners, they're like, yeah, I was lucky. Like even when they do it like 2 or 3 times, yeah, I was just lucky because they saw how many times you were kind of fighting close to death with that point of view.
There's also massive survivorship bias, right?
Yeah. Hugely. Yeah. And so the amount of times it's funny when people talk about theses, like they have this really abstract one, but you see like 100 companies in that area, and it's just like, well, why did you pick that one specific company? And a lot of the reason is kind of self-referencing, or like, oh yeah, the founders were great. Well, yeah, no shit, because now they've done 4 million ARR, but how would you be able to use that information to predict it forward? And so a lot of the times where I could think about how do we look at founders, or how do I look at founders, is like speed to execution, and it's that engagement that you have with you, that small data point. And so a lot of the founders that probably I enjoy working with, because I'm quite similar, is just like really high engagement. And so like some of my founders, I've messaged them at like 9 o'clock on a Friday, being like, hey, hope you have a lovely weekend, just thought about sharing this bit of news or information. 9:20 responded back. And like you see those people, but it's because they're just working at this level of pace at the really early stages is how they kind of succeed. I think the second bit is like capital, and like the other bit is like, if you think about kind of VC as a supply and demand bit, the more kind of the capital you create, the harder it is for your competitors to get that capital and therefore more likely to win.
Yep.
And so some of these mega fund strategies in certain companies that are successful.
This has been my constant kind of Ouroboros question, right? Like, did the company backed by was the company that was backed by Andreessen Horowitz great before it was backed by Andreessen Horowitz, or did it become great because it was backed by Andreessen Horowitz, right? And had the capital and the network and the relationships that they can bring to bear, right? Like, and you know, I think that I really struggle with that question constantly.
Yeah, it's a super challenging bit, and I don't think I've got the right answer to it, but you kind of see it in a lot of markets, and it doesn't stop you from raising an eyebrow. Where you've like raised 100 millions. I mean, like PayPal's a great example. Raised so much money, they were like giving people money, and that's how they were able to win the market.
Yeah.
Why? Because they raised so much money. Like Palantir is another great example. Like it was on the brink of collapsing, if I remember correctly, but Peter Thiel was there, and he has friends within the Department of Department of Defense,
Yeah.
Department of Defense, DoD, open his contracts. He's also a very rich individual who could bankroll the things, and that's not like a criticism. That's just
a reality.
That's the reality of it, and you just got to accept that those are the kind of markets which you play. But how can you, as a pre-seed and seed investor who's maybe not a part of those circles, can play to that leverage as a result? And so a lot of the things I do with kind of early stage companies is like, how do you drive artificial FOMO within a lot of the companies? So as a company who's just raised, and I literally say to them, like, even though you've signed the docs, keep on speaking to investors and keep on having that conversation, because everyone hates missing out with it, and it comes on their radar and helping that as a driver as a result. I mean, another tactic, I keep on telling everyone this, so it's probably not effective anymore, but change your profile to stealth startup. And what it does, it gets on these kind of data platforms, and then VCs reach out to you because they're interested and gets you in front of them. And so because of the sort of nature of it, the more capital you can raise for particular industries, don't be wrong, if you waste it all on Ferraris and Porsches and a basketball court in your office, fair play. But actually, like, being able to kind of gobble up the capital is a great way for you to kind of beat your competition in certain bits.
But there is now, I think, I would say that capital is no longer a moat, right? Like in the sense that it was several years ago, because you could raise capital and just throw it at marketing and burn to acquire customers. Whereas today, I mean, I think, you know, we've seen this shift to more deep tech style investment, which is R&D focused and heavy, which requires deeper pools of capital. So we're seeing fewer businesses funded with more capital. So I think really smart founders have to find these other ways of playing the system, right? And it is luck, right? I mean, like, again, I've given this example before. We worked with a company that was, you know, looking to raise from a early stage EIS type fund in the UK. The investor from that fund had told the founders that their model was not fit for purpose. Their FD was not fit for purpose either. We came in, rebuilt the model, you know, very, very quickly. They continued that conversation. That was all fine. And they ended up raising 8 million from Khosla Ventures in the US, right? Like, just an incredible name to have on the cap table versus what was essentially a tier 2, tier 3 kind of fund in the UK. And, you know, how much of that was luck? How much of that was, you know, as a result? I mean, look, it's a great team and great founder and a great business and product, right? But you got to be in the right room at the right time to have the right conversation, right? And
100%.
and it could well have been the fact that they ended up taking, for example, the money from this particular UK based investor, and maybe wouldn't have even gone after the larger round, right? So I think, you know, there is no linearity. I think is the point, right? Like, there is no cause and effect, and you got to play all sides of the game to be able to play the game well.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's incredibly luck driven. I don't think founders realize this, and this is the point I like badger on about the romanticization of like entrepreneurship. Like, there's some founders whose dad is like, I don't know, the CEO of their customer. And just going to open them up as a result. Like, you can't win on those sort of terms. It's not like an equal ground where it works. And that's kind of life, and that's the way it is, and we accept that. But to that point is, I've met founders who, actually, I think there was a founder who bumped into someone at the train station because they had a Mercia logo. like right place at the right time. And you could quite easily see how life could be incredibly different for it not to be. I think you can increase your surface area of luck, don't get me wrong, by networking and getting in the right room and stuff, but
There is still luck.
There's still a huge amount of luck involved from every investor. And like, you know, to your point you made earlier about when someone doing a test, did they know that they were going to have a kid and so were more, you know, euphoric and more likely to happen, or had a bad night's sleep? Well, what about customer conversations with founders have where they're working with a big enterprise customer and it's Barclays and, you know, whatever, not, it could be £1 million ARR, which shoots up to the moon. What if that person, you know, was stuck in traffic and was just really annoyed that morning? Or, you know, some emergency kind of came in as a result. Like, it's crazy how fine line things are.
It's ultimately because everything comes down to people, right? And people are complex individuals with emotions, with desires, with hopes, right? Like, you know, maybe they didn't get the promotion they wanted. You know, maybe they've just decided they're going to do, you know, half-ass their job for the next few months because they've got another job lined up or whatever, right? Like, there's lots of reasons that things can go right or go wrong. And I think, you know, I think it's true of venture, you know, as you said earlier, true of ventures as anything else. You've got to increase the number of at-bats you have, right? Like, you've got to just increase the number of opportunities that you go after, because hopefully at the end of the 30, one comes through, or the 100, one comes through. And, you know, the numbers are there. Like, we know that most VCs will go through something like 3,000 to 5,000 pitch decks in a year, and they'll invest in 10 to 20 companies. Like, you know, that is a really, really, really small percentage. And we also know, conversely, that 90% of startups will fail for one reason or the other. And failure means a lot of things. I think, you know, by fail, what most people mean is don't get to $1 billion exit outcome. But there is a whole range of stuff that happens in between there, right? So I think, yeah, look, I mean, so I don't ever call it luck. I call it serendipity. I think there is, you know, I think there is something in the world where you put stuff out, stuff comes back to you. It doesn't necessarily come back today or tomorrow. It might come back in 6 months or a year or whatever. It might never come back to you, right? But I think the point is, if you never attempt, you won't get the opportunity to find out if that serendipity is going to come back to you. But yeah, look, I mean, I think, you know, with both of those points, you know, intelligence as well as luck, I'm fully on board. I want to shift kind of direction. So, you know, considering the kind of move in the workplace culture amongst Gen Z, especially, and you are Gen Z, I presume.
Actually, millennial.
You're millennial, damn it. Okay, yeah, actually, no, that makes more sense now that I think about it. Because you'd have had to been, you'd be a very young venture capitalist otherwise. What do you think the implications are for a founder's traditional kind of work style? You know, someone like Steve Jobs or, you know, or Jeff Bezos. And how does this affect the venture success in attracting top talent today?
Yeah, I do a lot of kind of philosophical, just kind of thought experiments in VC, just because, I don't know, I need a hobby or something like that. So Irish, if you got any ideas for hobbies, that'd be great.
I mean, if you look at my chat GPT, there's like 1 billion, none of which I've actually started. But yes.
I kind of goes to the idea is, look, I engage with a lot of like Gen Z people. To your point, I'm not that far off from, you know, being a Gen Z myself. And like, if you look at their like, well, I think if we read books on like Steve Jobs and, you know, Jeff Bezos, they talk about like the culture that was there, which is like incredibly cutthroat, like 996 is for like pussies, like you got to go even harder than that, bro. And when I speak to Gen Zs, and like, they're just kind of like, I want work-life balance. I want to spend time with my friends. And so, and you're kind of seeing this with even like investment banking. There were like interesting like reports where
Goldman Sachs,
was struggling to hire people. Yeah. And so you kind of think about that frame in the terms of like tech and about that ecosystem, and, you know, some of the controversy on 996 that's been going around.
So just for those that don't know, and if you don't know, be glad you don't know, 996 is the supposed approach to working from 9 till 9, 6 days a week, and like working out the rest of your life around that. By the way, I'm definitely not I'm not an adherent or an admirer of kind of hustle culture and that sort of culture. I do, however, see, if you are trying to build a consequential business,
I agree.
Like, you kind of do need that level of commitment to an extent. Now, does that mean you rigidly focus 9 to 9, 6 days a week? No, right? Like, there are different ways of approaching that. And by the way, it's incredibly difficult to remain productive and focused for that level of time. Like the human body itself will just naturally be less efficient and productive. You may end up making worse decisions. So the type of work that you do also, has to play a role in that. But I think, and I'm definitely someone that, has found balance later in their life. But a lot of people would say I'm not balanced. Like I haven't had a holiday in probably a decade. Like, and I've been on holiday, but I've always worked whilst I've been away because I have to, or because I actually just can't switch off from it, which, it has its own issues. But equally, I run every day. I spend time with my kids and my wife, and I'll sit at lunchtime and eat lunch with my wife for an hour and a half, right? Like those are things that most people can't do. But then I'm working until 10 in the evening, one way or the other afterwards, right?
And like, I mean, I had a 9-to-5 job and I hated it.
Yeah.
Because I was just so bored after 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
And like, I just want to move faster. I want to go faster. So it's definitely not, I'm advocating for like, 9 to 5, 5 days a week. I get why some people love it and go about it. But the importance, I think, to it is like appreciating that, millennials, probably, I think, Generation X, if I remember correctly, or do my sociology.
That's me. Yeah. I think I'm an ex-millennial.
I think you're the cool name. Like X just sounds so much better than like millennial.
Yeah, but I'm not that guy.
But to like that point, it's like, okay, it was the importance of, work is such an integral part of your life and your existence. So the more you do of it, the sort of better. And that's shifted why. And that's what made, Steve Jobs phenomenally work well, because at that cultural point in time, or that zeitgeist, was people cared about work a lot and it was an integral part. And so actually that 996 made a lot of sense. But I guess when we think about kind of like future generations, where they actually have different beliefs on that.
Career is no longer their persona.
Yeah. Like some of the friends I met, I remember they were like, yes, after a week I just quit. And I'm like, do you have a job lined up? No, I just quit. I just didn't want to do it. I was just like, I could have never have done that. I felt far too guilt-ridden to have done that.
Yeah, but that's also the Punjabi in you.
Yeah, that is a Punjabi in me. Yeah. And my mum, the shame on my mum would have been too much.
It's horrific. But no, look, I mean, just digging into this a bit more, right? Like, so I remember when I first came back to the UK in 2015 and was working with, at the time it was, a team in Macmillan, the publishers. And I remember one of the junior guys being like, my contract says 9 till 5 with an hour for lunch. I'm like, what? And because I remember, when I was at PwC, when I was at Deutsche Bank, etc., like there was an embarrassment if you left early, right? Like, I mean, like you felt embarrassed because you knew people were kind of looking at you. I was the sort of person that would get my stuff done quickly because I'm very efficient in the way that I work, right? So I would be finished by 6 o'clock and be like, okay, do I really want to sit here for another couple of hours pretending to work, right? But I also understood absolutely intrinsically that the way to succeed in any typical career path was presenteeism to an extent.
Yeah, agreed.
But also showing that you could get things done quicker, better, more efficiently, etc. Right? Basically, make yourself indispensable. What I see in the current kind of work culture, so experience much more important, like having experiences much more much more interesting and important than what it takes to get those experiences. Like work is now a means, not the end, put it that way. And of course, that's always been the case to an extent. But I think for very driven people, often work is both the means and the end. And I think I look at like my nieces, my nephews, and others, and their friends, and so on and so forth. And a lot of them are really driven, and all the rest of it. But I just think they come at it from such a different perspective than we would have. And they're less willing to bend to kind of corporatism.
Exactly that. And that's the thing is the thinking about is like, I do believe that there will be, Gen Alphas, Gen Zs that probably will want to do the 996 and, part of the investment banking career. I'm not saying that, but it's just like, how do you build fewer of them, and how do you build like a company on that basis or that structure of a much larger degree? Is knowing that actually these are the behaviors and mindsets, and you need to sort of adapt to it and think about your leadership style and your coaching style to address those things. Because if you just don't have talent, you can't run the business, the first and foremost. And it's about I do think kind of every generation, what they've always cared about is just like fitting in and belonging and being a sense of community. But in my view, is like that community for like younger generations, from what I've observed, is yes, work is a community, but not the community.
Yeah.
And I do think kind of work either has to kind of, how do we blend into those other communities to make it feel like more a part of their life, or just accept that this is a part of the community and we need to have a different organizational design model to support with that kind of those different values and beliefs.
Well, it's a fracturing, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
So humans are inherently tribal. I pride myself personally on trying not to be as tribal as possible. Like, love politics, hate political parties. Like, I'm just not that guy, right? But I think that fragmentation has happened at so many levels, like the social contract. I think the problem inherently is that you used to, the social contract was, you go, you get a job, you'll be able to get a mortgage, you'll be able to buy a house, you'll be able to have a family,
Exactly that,
and you'll be able to retire with a pension. That whole contract, as we know, feels like it is, if not already broken, like pretty much, compromised in many, many, many ways. And certainly if you're a young person, like getting on the housing ladder, if you don't have the bank of mum and dad behind you is incredibly difficult. And like, I would say that for myself as well, right? And therefore, if work no longer leads to the outcomes in life that you would like to have, then work becomes less important, right? I guess is the other point of that. And I think the other two shifts that have happened is three shifts, right? Information age, so that's made life and work very different. You then had COVID and all the resultant work from home and remote working that basically became a lot stickier than most people, or certainly older school kind of employers would have liked it to have been. And now with AI, you just have so much fragmentation in terms of how you can work and where you can how you can drive efficiency through yourself as well as your business. And what that leads to is, well, you've got all these buckets of opportunity where you don't need to spend as much time at your job to do your job, and therefore you look for meaning in other areas, right? And you think about the classic examples about Google, Facebook, etc., who built these massive campuses, right, to essentially emulate being at university, where you could crash, you could play ping pong, you could play basketball, you could do whatever, right? Like, you could have fun. What that was a way to lock those individuals into that ecosystem so that they were constantly working, even if they felt like they weren't, right? And I think, someone who speaks really well about this is Scott Galloway.
Love that guy.
Yeah, he's great. Professor at NYU Stern, I think. And but he talks about it a lot, right? So he talks about two things. He talks about alcohol, and he talks about young men at work, right? And he talks about young men very specifically because of some of the things that he sees online, I guess. But more generally, this whole point about, if you are young, go and work physically somewhere, because you will learn, you will meet people. That is where you may find your prospective wife or your husband. It may be where you learn a new discipline, or leads to the next opportunity, or whatever it is. And I think we've lost a lot of that at the moment.
And I think that's the really sad bit with a lot of it. Like, candidly, I grew up in Oxford. My wife's from Hitchin. The only way I was able to meet my wife was because I was doing my engineering job and traveling up and down the country, working in power stations, and keeping my Tinder radius very wide to attract. I don't know if I should. I don't think she'd be like me. Don't think she'd like to know that I said on the podcast.
Amrit going around Scotland, out of Hebrides and Wales, just
swiping right. But yeah,
I hope she listens to this.
Oh God, yeah, it's gonna kill me. But to I think to that end, it's that point of like community. And I think when it's solely on a screen, I think one of the things I really worry about is ability to communicate and ability to have kind of conversations and read like social cues.
Yeah, for sure.
That's a huge thing. And I kind of hated it when I was like, working from home is the best. I get to the gym in the morning, get to go for a run after work. There's actually a lot of benefit just being in the office. Those sort of relationships you build with people.
Also the serendipitous conversations again.
Happen outside of the boardrooms and meetings, that I think becomes hugely enriching for it. But I think it needs to be done in a way to kind of encourage people to see that benefit. And that's really difficult. Kind of enforcing people, any younger generation is just gonna be rebellious and be like, nope, not doing that. You're corporate, you're sucking my life. And actually there needs to be a way to make it kind of a lot more enriching in that period. So yeah, it is really like tricky, but I think kind of companies need to maybe address that problem of actually realizing, how do we make it for more of a community as opposed to an employee, like it was in the 50s. When you think about it, like I remember working in some power stations. They had a pub in the power station back in the 50s. Because after Friday, people would go to work. They had a squash court. And really what's happened is like, don't want to sound like huge like a socialist, but really shareholders have been the most important stakeholder over a period of time because that's been linked to greater CEO pay and management of the board. And these other stakeholders have been reduced over a period as a result. And so what I think we're going to see, and hopefully maybe the Gen Zs and the Gen Alphas as well, is going to start to maybe realign that a bit more to what it used to be, where actually kind of it becomes more of that community where employees have more of a say or feel more comfortable in working in a place that, they don't feel that
it's not an imposition. It's something that they want to do rather than have to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the massive challenge is that the whole definition of workforce, workplace, and work is going through this massive shift now. And therefore actually what it means, I think about this for my kids, one who's 24, one who's 18, like for the 18-year-old, very much by the time she's out of university, I just do not know what the landscape of work will look like for her. And, even today, like if I think about, my 24-year-old, right? Like if she's applying for work, you go on LinkedIn and you click easy apply. Well, there's 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 other people. Like, so how do you carve out space for people to really be able to show up as who they are and not just be one of a mass, right? Which is what it feels like. Everyone has basically become just like an N of one, but essentially like undiscoverable within a morass of people, right? So I do absolutely agree. Like community is important, but those communities can happen online. They can happen offline. They don't necessarily need to work in the same way as they maybe did in the 50s or 60s. But if you're not getting something out of your work beyond a paycheck, and let's be really clear, obviously there are lots of jobs where, there is that. But if you're building a startup, for example, right, like, it's very clear in the UK, we deprioritize equity. Equity is not the thing that employees are looking for. So what is it that they're looking for? Well, they're looking for kudos, right? They want to be part of the cool, sexy startup scene. They want experience. They want cash for sure. They want the remuneration. But yeah, maybe they also want to feel like they're part of something that's bigger than themselves. And therefore, how do you create that environment for them? I think is super important as we move forward. I want to change, not quite change tax, but I think change tack rather. But I think kind of almost a continuation of this. You are building your career and venture at the moment, right? So you are not yet at the pinnacle of
5 years
that
deep.
career. 5 years in. What have you observed as being the essential skills needed to transition from being kind of like an associate to managing a fund versus the skills needed for effective deal making? And where do you see there's a mismatch? I mean, I guess, for someone who's looking to get into venture, I guess, what would be your advice?
Yeah, it's really good. I remember going in, thought it'd be like a huge quant job, to be honest, and be like looking at financial models and think about the world, and realized that was absolute bollocks, to be quite frank. It's more about people, but I think that's what I love about it so much more, is because it is about the people. And so I think you've got to enjoy working with people. And that's got to be the most rewarding thing. Like, I mean, I've been up, God knows, like 1, 2 a.m., founder calls, working at 9 o'clock, all that sort of stuff, just speaking to founders. And I just love it. It gives me the most rewarding thing, I think, about venture. And so I guess if you're sort of the people who like to kind of think of things outside of in a block, in a random room or in a dark room, and thinking about how the world makes a better place, just don't think venture is for you, it is kind of being out there and spending time with founders.
Mm.
It's like day in, day out. And some people don't like that. They love the transaction piece and go, yes, I get to create these really credible, share structures and, kind of negotiate terms like I'm a lawyer and, write these great papers. So probably the smallest part of it. And I think that's where I think I see a lot of people get kind of quite disenfranchised and like there's this trough of illusionment where like people from like 3 to 10 years, just this huge drop off. Just not quite what it is. And I think really what most people kind of get excited by who stay in it for a long time, it's just the founders, and it's either on the sourcing and on the portfolio side, sort of things. I think one thing people don't realize is like your job is to quote unquote try and find the best company. And you're in an industry where there's 500, maybe 1,000 firms in the UK doing the same thing. And so it's constantly like sourcing companies, meeting with companies, meeting them before. Some people even meet them before they've left their last job. And it's a lot of that bound and building up relationships over a long period of time. Like it takes a while to build up that deal flow engine to be able to source opportunities. But that is probably what you'd be spending most of your time as an associate, principal. And I think the kind of managing partners who I aspire to be and who I look up to still have that same behavior, even at a much later stage for it. They just love, getting out there, spending time with founders, and will just make time for it, even though it's probably what they shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think someone said, to have to be a really great partner in a fund, you've either got to be great at attracting deals or attracting investment.
Yeah,
like it's one of those two things.
And then to your point, as you move up, you probably get less and less. I guess the wheels have been taken off. You have to run your own deals. You then become more on the board and get more involved with that bit. But to your kind of important point, running a fund is very different to being an investor.
Yeah, sure.
You've got to manage like payroll. You've got to manage operations. You're hiring staff to kind of run this like fund on this behalf. You do have certain structures where it's a partnership and it's just a partner-only led model. But it is very different, and there are important nuances with that. And I think people don't quite get that. I think what we see a lot of time in venture is the best investor should be the fund manager and the fund principal. I don't always see that to be the case. I think that works when you're a solo GP, where it's like a partnership model. But within that partnership model, you've got to reassure that dude over there is going to be the guy who's going to be doing the deals, and someone else is going to be do something else. And that's probably a bit of a shock to kind of people. People just want to do deals because they just love that bit. But there's actually a lot of admin. It's to your point, like LP fundraising is an absolute exhausting amount of time, and it's a very different skill. Like there are some phenomenal investors I know who, they love spending time with founders. When it comes into a room with like LPs, it's a very different kettle of fish.
Yeah.
In terms of it, it's
the power dynamic changes for a start,
huge.
Right?
Yeah.
Like 100%.
But you're speaking to like sovereign wealth funds, family offices. It's a different social circle to, scrappy founders. And being able to kind of switch that and being able to understand those dynamics is hugely different from it. But like I said, I think one of the most important bits is like an associate, as I always bang on about this to the junior members in the team or the people I train, is like find your own voice. And what I mean by this is like I started like venture trying to like copy some of the investors that I like to be. I just felt really disingenuous to who I was. And so it was just like having the confidence to be yourself is one of probably the hardest things. Well, personally, maybe for me, is what I've struggled with, is about being yourself and being comfortable in your shoes. Because, it's quite easy for you to, do a deal that, Sequoia's leading and, follow on the back end of it. It's not really where you get alpha. You get alpha by having taken a consensus view and hoping that, the next round where it becomes really quite successful. And that's quite hard, and being in your skin. And everyone, let's face it, you have the data that 90% of companies are going to fail, but you've got to go on a limb for saying like, this is the company where I believe it's going to win, and being able to persuade people. And that's a huge shock for people. And like, there is no rule book for venture. It's not like, investment banking or corporate finance where like you can train, learn about it. You just gotta, it's that famous graph, like, was it find out? Like, fuck around, find out. Yeah.
And I think this, there can't be a rule book for venture. I mean, the whole point is out. Like, this is why we've had we've had people on the podcast, I had Adam Schwabe and from episode 1, and they built this engine to look at founders and all the rest. And I'm like, yeah, great. And of course, he had a really great response to this. But if you try and find a pattern, then are you not inherently therefore missing out on the alpha, because the alpha is in the outliers, right? Like if there was a pattern, everyone would be doing it, everyone would be making money. But actually, you got to find the guys that don't sit inside that pattern.
I mean, there's like a really good law called like Goddard's law,
Mm-hmm.
which I think was an economist talking about it, and it's like when you focus on a sole measurement, that ceases to be a good measurement. And I think a lot about adventure is people trying to distill it of like, people want childhood trauma, you got to find childhood trauma, and you got to find really bad childhood trauma for it to work. And I kind of get it, and it is a piece of the puzzle.
It's not the whole
but it's not the whole thing. And I think when it distills into that, that's where I think a lot of these AI models become quite ineffective in that and of itself. And the market's constantly changing. Like what a great founder is hugely different to what it will be in 5 to 6 years.
Well, yeah, to your point, I mean, Gen Z, etc., will be building very, very different businesses, I would expect. Yeah,
like I remember when I joined venture, it was a really good talk by like a general partner. He was like, find CEOs who are product managers, because they understand technical side and the commercial side, and they can build anymore. Doesn't matter anymore. I've tried it. I've lost money doing it because they constantly feel on building the product. And it's maybe like for deployment engineers is the new thing.
I'm like, find people who can sell. Like that's literally, that is it.
That is literally it. And then I think you kind of have to think about it from like that perspective, but it's your own rule book, and it's the way you play venture and willing to put your neck out on the line, which a lot of people don't feel comfortable with. They go back to what's the market size as opposed to like challenging, like, why is market size an important thing? Yeah. Well, it came about when like Don Valentine came in the early 2000s, where the internet was, a new thing. And so actually the market size mattered quite a huge amount because it was a huge blue ocean. And so the bigger the market, the bigger you could capture of it. We're now in a very different period in time where, tech and software is becoming increasingly becoming more point solution. There's so many more competitors, and with the lot of AI, like next week you see like 6 competitors. Does market matter really matter as much as opposed to maybe other points that matter? And so the fact it's constantly evolving over time, the rule book, there really can't, to your point, there really can't be a rule book over it. And I think when people ask me what my thesis is, I go, it's vibes.
Does this feel right?
Does this feel right? I'm quite like Rick Rubio when I think about like venture investments. Like I've got a good feeling about this, and then go for it. But what's quite funny is when I do my angel investments, I spend less than 30 minutes with the founder. And I've other angel investors who spent like 6-7 months thinking about a thesis and all this sort of stuff.
I think it's gut. Like at that stage, it's like it's purely, does this feel right? Does this person feel right?
But I'd say it goes even later to like seed and even Series A, where guts, don't get me wrong, gut, that proportion of gut and that decision making is probably less. There's still a lot of gut because there's still so many unknowns. And to your point, if you do have a perfect thing, like there are so many kind of data scraping tools and AI tools that will probably be flagged up by then, in which case you don't really get alpha at that point of view. And so to your point, like again, so the associate for me, it's that philosophical journey is like, how do you want to play venture in your work? How do you want to treat founders? How do you want to engage with it? I know some investors who are like, I spend like 5 minutes with the founder call, make a decision then or not. If not, I'll leave. It's not how I want to play it, because culture for me, I remember breaking into venture and like, I would be, it'd make my day or week when like a VC would take a call with me. Like it was over the moon. I could pick their brains on it. They'd give some of my time. And I can imagine myself being in that founder's position where it would be, actually, I try and respond to everyone on LinkedIn. I've gotten worse, but I try and get back to them and try and have calls with people where I can, because I get it. I was in that position, and like, I probably will waste time, and I get that I will waste time by doing that. That's how I want to play venture, and there's no rule book for it. As long as I, hopefully make some money on the way out, then that's all that really matters at the end of the day. And to be consensus. And so when you go from like investment director, you've probably got more of a thesis. You've got more about what you look for. And then you're managing teams of investors, which is really challenging.
Because they will have their own.
They will have their own thing.
Thesis and
like
approach.
I think every investor is probably like a really annoying employee, to be really quite frank. Because we all think we know better than everyone else. We go, that general partner, she has no idea what she's doing, or he has no idea what he's doing. I'm right. I've got the golden thesis, and it's really hard to like manage investors. And my personal belief, though, I love to kind of chat to people who maybe prove me wrong. Is like I find venture, I just don't get how it scales because it is ultimately about trust, and there's trust of people. Like, am I willing to risk my carry for your decision making basis? And when there's so many people, we become so removed from it. You don't understand their passion. You can't meet the founders. Decision making becomes really difficult. And even when you do have small people, you got to go, actually, I trust this person and make it scale. And I think that's where it's kind of what you've seen on like Benchmark and some of the other funds has been very artisanal, is because, look, it's a trust game at the end of the day because there's so many, to the point we discussed earlier, so much luck is involved and so much randomness is involved. You've got to trust that person as a result. To all the way to kind of, again, managing partner where you're LP fundraising, which feel for my GP brothers and sisters out there, kind of, it's getting better, but yeah.
It's definitely been a tough 2 years minimum.
To the point, it's like when capital, like what is the product you're offering for them, and how does it try and differentiate where capital is kind of commodity. And so people try and have a niche of like, we've got talent operators, we've got an angel group. We've all heard it all before, or like if you look at like every VC's website, it's the same adjectives or synonyms to the same adjectives.
We look for disruptive founders changing the face of software.
We are contrarian, not everyone else. We're contrarian.
Yeah. And by the way, we're going to get to contrarian because, like, frankly, I've yet to have anyone come on this podcast and actually give me a truly contrarian view. I am hopeful. Amrit,
God.
But yeah.
And to that point, it's like that's really difficult from an LP perspective on how you kind of go about that and being able to position it in the right way. And it is, I would say, at that point, like, again, it's still building trust.
Well, the problem is that as a VC, you probably do have a contrarian view. The problem is that as an LP, you want simplicity.
Yeah.
So it's much easier to say we invest in deep tech at seed than it is say we are going to chase after whoever's going to solve fusion, because that feels like really, really tough.
Yeah.
But okay, I get investing at deep tech at seed, like that's fine.
But like, it's what's crazy when I've seen like GP's decks on like LP fundraising. There's a slide of like who we've co-invested with. And a lot of the time when I've asked questions is that they keep on asking about like, have you invested with Sequoia? Have you invested with like Andreessen or Founders Fund? And like, it's a bit surprising, but I kind of get it because like those funds have a certain amount of capital allocation.
It's the halo effect. Yeah.
Exactly. And like, this is like a byproduct to getting into that, as opposed to thinking long term of, could this be the next Andreessen? Could this be the next Founders Fund? So it is like really tricky as a managing partner. I don't have a lot of envy for them, but a lot of the times where I think it works quite well is when the general partners have been founders and operators themselves, because they actually have management skills.
Well, that's a whole other podcast. And well, actually, probably not even, because we've discussed it so often on here before. But that is a Europe-wide problem, right? Like 6% of VCs have come from an operating background versus 60% of US VCs. So I mean, like, it's problematic.
So I guess my probably nuanced take in it is, I don't believe you have to be an ex-operator to be a great VC. And
I agree with that. Yeah,
and also being great management. Like, there is, Fred Wilson actually is an ex-operator, phenomenal fund in NYC.
Subscribe to his newsletter.
It is a good newsletter. But I think what you really have to care, and I think this is really core of it, is I've seen a lot of VCs get bruised because like investments haven't gone their way and they get really jaded over time. For me, I think kind of great partners is like hopeless romantics, where you just constantly keep on caring about people, where you care about your workforce and staff, where you care about your founders, and you're willing to fall in quote unquote love again and again and again. Well, in my eyes, that for me is the general partners that I would love to work for and love to work with, and the ones that I aspire to be, because those are people who, you know, see the good and opportunities in things. And actually, for me, when I've seen about companies, it's about taking the ego of yourself, but ego of the company. And you don't quite see that because, look, I get it. It's really hard to fundraise. You want to get a lot of the economics for yourself because you believe you deserve it. But how do you build a legacy over time? And like, the Acquired podcast is a really good one to read on. And listen on. And there was a great one on like Benchmark. And there's a great one on like Renaissance Technologies. And like, the two core themes was, it was never about hoarding economics at the top. It was about passing the baton over and making it fair and equal for it.
Got it.
And so, look, I think operator VCs are great at that. because they understand we can't keep on doing this. But I also think you don't have to be an operator to know that those life lessons with it.
I think, yeah, look, I mean, I think just to wrap this up, they are different disciplines, right? Like at the end of the day, right? And I've said this before on the podcast, like one of the things that I struggle with massively is having been an operator, or like essentially having run businesses for the last 20 years. You know, my focus is on what is this forecast telling me and how accurate it is and how much do I believe it and all the rest of it, right? Whereas actually as an investor, you've got to suspend belief for that period. And to your point, think about the person, think about, you know, their motivations and where they're going, and look at what could, like, you have to sit there, say, okay, these are all the things that I think could go wrong, and then solve for those, like in your head, and kind of say, okay, now I've figured out, okay, what are the things that could go right, right? And it's a balance between those two things that I think, you know, make the difference. Okay, I want to wrap up with the last couple of questions, which you know, we ask all of our guests. So, what is one thing that you have a contrarian conviction about from any area of life, whether that's work, politics, socially, or at home?
Yeah, it's a really good one. There's probably a lot that I probably can't say, otherwise I won't have a job in VC. Not that it's, you know, any political points, but I guess there's sort of two, and when you pick which one's more contrarian, and we'll go down it. One, I think investment theses are toilet paper. The other is, I think we're really running into like a loneliness epidemic in the next 10, 20 years. So I guess, Arish, maybe a question back to you. Which one do you feel like is more contrarian, if at all?
So actually the loneliness question we've covered. Actually, we've had other people say this and I think you know, it's one that, again, Professor Scott Galloway talks about quite a lot, and this is his whole point about, you know, going and working with people directly. Investment theses needing to go in the toilet is something that has come up again, but I'd love to get your view on why. Yeah.
No, of course. So again, I'm actually writing a post on this kind of initial framing of it is, I think let's think about forecasting of markets as a starting point when we think about things. Is we've tried to apply this kind of scientific or quasi-scientific view on markets, but they're just a collection of human behaviors at the core of it. And we know that, I guess, humans from, you know, work that Daniel Kahneman have done and others highlight that humans are fundamentally irrational. And so there's a level of unpredictability in humans, and it's that collective unpredictability is what markets are at the core front. And look, Isaac Newton actually wrote, I think he had a very famous quote, it was like, I can predict celestial bodies, but I can't predict markets.
Yeah, sure.
And so fundamentally forecasts are incredibly difficult. When we look at it empirically, you've got, you know, a team of quants in JP Morgan, you know, trying to predict the S&P the next year and are always out. Like, it's just really never accurate at the forefront. And so when we think about venture, we're thinking about 7 years from now, what hope and how do I have as a VC to be able to go about that things? The sort of, I think, second aspect to, I think, investment thesis perspective is when we often approach is looking back on things and being able to unpick it. So we'll go, why did this trade happen, or what we do a post-mortem on things, hoping it would give us richest insights to make us a forecast. And I think to the point you've mentioned earlier where it's about experts, I think experts are phenomenal at the dissection of it.
Can past behavior predict future success?
No.
Simple as that.
Being able to explain something is not the same as forecasting.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's probably where the second kind of bottleneck is like, we don't really know how to forecast stuff. We know how to explain stuff in the background and have those models for it, but not being able to forecast things, particularly in a 7-year horizon, I'd say probably even post 6 months. Because they are open, complex systems, people are constantly coming in and out of things. So when we think about forecasts as a whole, we know it's just really difficult to predict things. And so we either take very vague forecasts, which fine, don't write an investment thesis on it. Like, AI will be a big thing. Like, cool. And then I think people then go in with a really kind of surgical precision on what they think about kind of thesis on a certain area, or this is the right go-to-market strategy, these are the right people, such and such. And then we look back on it in years from now and go, well, that was wrong. Well, that timing was wrong. And to your point, how much of luck was involved in a lot of those situations?
I mean, like, honestly speaking, if you listen to the pod I recorded with Alok Sama, who's the ex-president of and CFO of SoftBank, like, he talks about this with Masayoshi Son. He was directionally correct. more often than not, right? Like he took a long-term bet on AI, which is why he went into ARM. He took a long-term bet on mobile phones, which is why he got into the various sort of telephony plays that he did. He took a long-term view on ride sharing, which is why at one point I think he said he owned, I don't know if it was 8% or no, it could have been way more than that. Anyway, I have to listen back to the episode to get the right metric, but he owned a massive swathe of the global ride sharing industry. Now, at the time, I'm sure people were like, you're crazy, you're out.
Yeah.
What was wrong? And of course, like he got some stuff wrong, as we know, WeWork and all the rest of it. But he's been right, like more often than he's been wrong, right? And I think the whole point is that you couldn't have predicted that, or you couldn't have forecast that. Like as an observer, if you tried to dissect his rationale, you probably wouldn't have. Probably wouldn't have been able to. I want to end up with one final question, and I feel like we already have, but so we can get to know the real you. What is something that moves you emotionally?
It's a really good question. I think maybe what motivates me and moves me is I love like just the immigrant trail, and I think there's a lot of power you can kind of get from that. And what I mean by that is like my grandmother, I guess both my grandparents, like decided to take the risk to go from a village in Punjab all the way to the UK. No money, no decision, whatnot. Like me be doing that is really fearful. To a land where they couldn't speak English, could not do any of that. My, grandmother on my dad's side had like brought along like 8 kids with her. Somehow managed to be able to go from a ferry to a point to be able to build a home and get my dad into university to that point. And so like in some instances that kind of motivates me of like, Amrit, just man the fuck up. If they could have done it and they carried on, they didn't complain.
It's a different world, man.
Right.
It's a different world. Obviously I come from multiple migrant backgrounds. So, my grandparents migrated from India to Kenya. My parents migrated from Kenya to the UK, to Dubai, to back to the UK. I was born in Kenya. I'm a migrant essentially. And then I migrated to Papua New Guinea and then to Australia. It is not for everyone, and it is it is really tough, but it is incredibly character building. But the more important point I think from what you said is you can just do stuff. You really can just do stuff. And yes, maybe what caused them to do it at the time was poverty or famine or whatever it might have been, but they made the decision that they were better off somewhere else than staying where they are. And you can actually distill that down into so many different life choices. Like, are you where you should be right now? Should you be in this studio? Should you be in that job? Should you, you be with that partner? Should you be, all of that sort of stuff. And you can just do stuff.
And yeah, probably just to end up on that is like, it kind of goes to this quote, which keeps on getting pushed to me, is like, life is never as good, but then similarly, it's never as bad as you expect.
Yeah, of course.
So the risk you take are really never as bad as what you're doing. And so don't be as afraid as much as what you're going about it, even if it is as daunting as it is.
Yeah. I think that's an incredible sentiment. I think we overestimate the negative and we underestimate the positive and the impact that it has on our lives. I mean, this has been an absolutely incredible
Thank you for having me.
Episode. Thank you so much for joining me. For the audience, where can they find you online? Are you on LinkedIn? You're on X? Where can they find you on the interweb?
Yes, of course. On LinkedIn, so Amrit_Sami or Amrit Sami. And then I think that's also my X as well, which I don't really post and get back on that. I have horrible memes and pretty bad tweets. But if you want to subscribe to that, by all means, go for it.
Amazing. Well, look, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it. And it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, Arish.